The sky above New Atlanta was dark, not because it was night, but because the clouds were thick with smoke. The city had once been a symbol of human progress. Tall buildings, clean energy, fast ships that traveled to other stars. Now, it was just another place caught in the storm. Below the smoke, people moved quickly through the streets. Some wore uniforms, others wore fear on their faces. The war had started not with a bang, but with small fights, broken promises, and old wounds that never healed. Now those small things had grown into something big, something no one could stop. Humanity had spread far from Earth. They lived on dozens of planets, built bases on moons, and sent ships deep into space. At first, they did this together. The Central Alliance based on Earth made rules and tried to keep peace across all human space. But not everyone liked the rules. The outer colonies, planets farther away from Earth, felt ignored. They said the Alliance took too much and gave too little. Over time, the anger grew. Trade routes became battlegrounds. Leaders argued and then stopped talking altogether. Protests turned into riots, and then came the attack on Titan. No one knew who fired the first shot. All they knew was that a diplomatic meeting exploded in fire. Important people died. Blame flew faster than bullets. Within days, both sides declared full mobilization. The Alliance called it Operation Unity. The colonies called it Liberation Day. But what it really was war. In the cities, factories began working around the clock. Machines that once built homes and hospitals now made weapons and armor. Schools trained young men and women to fight. Families said goodbye to sons and daughters who might never return. On Mars, the shipyards filled with new warships. Huge vessels that could carry thousands of soldiers and enough firepower to destroy entire moons. Older ships were pulled out of storage, repaired, and sent back into service. Space stations that once served as peaceful outposts became military bases overnight. Communication lines were cut. Travel between systems became dangerous, and beyond the borders of human space, alien species watched with growing concern. The Xelari Concord, a race known for their calm minds and peaceful ways, issued a statement calling for restraint. The Voric hegemony, a proud warrior species, sent scouts to watch the human fleets grow. No one thought humans would go this far. Most species believed humanity was still young, still learning how to live among the stars. But now, they saw something else. Humans were not just preparing for war, they were embracing it. On Earth, President Elizabeth Grant stood before the council. She was tired, her face lined with worry, but her voice was strong. "We did not ask for this war," she said, "but we will not run from it." Her words were broadcast across every colony world, every military base, every ship in orbit. Some cheered, others wept. Among them was Jason Wilson, a 22-year-old mechanic from Alpha Centauri IV. He had no dreams of glory or power. He just wanted to fix engines and maybe start his own garage someday. But when the draft notices came, he knew there was no avoiding it. He packed his few belongings, kissed his mother goodbye, and boarded a transport heading to a training camp on Europa. Miles away, on a mining station orbiting Uranus, Lisa Martinez read the same news. She was a communications officer, used to sending messages between ships and stations. Now her job was different. She monitored enemy transmissions, decrypted codes, and passed along orders. She didn't want to be part of a war either, but here she was. As the weeks passed, battles began. First, it was skirmishes, small fights near asteroid belts or abandoned outposts. Then came the real battles. Fleets clashed near key planets. Orbital platforms fell to enemy forces. Entire garrisons were wiped out. Humans fought humans. Brothers against brothers. Friends turned into enemies. In one battle near Epsilon Eridani, two carrier groups met in open space. Neither side held back. Missiles flew like rain. Beams of light tore through hulls. Ships burned and broke apart. By the end, only 3 ships remained, one from each side, and both were crippled. The survivors drifted in silence, waiting for help that might never come. On Titan, where the war began, The ruins of the old diplomacy center still smoldered. Scientists had tried to rebuild, but the site had become a graveyard. Now it was guarded by soldiers who patrolled the wreckage like ghosts. Farther out, in the cold void beyond Pluto's orbit, something else was happening. A deep space, listening, post picked up strange signals. Faint, distant, but unmistakably alien. At first, no one paid attention. Everyone was too busy fighting their own wars to care about whispers in the dark, but the whispers grew louder. They came from a system no human had ever visited, a place marked only on old star maps as Sector 9X. No one knew what waited there. But something was watching, and it was getting closer. Meanwhile, on Earth, the president signed a new order. It authorized the use of experimental weapons, machines, designed not just to fight but to change the very nature of war. Some called it madness, others, necessity. Jason Wilson sat in a barracks on Europa, staring at a picture of his home. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He only knew that today, he was still alive. Lisa Martinez listened to the static-filled reports coming in from the front. She heard the names of dead pilots, lost ships, destroyed worlds. She closed her eyes and tried to remember a time when space was quiet, when humans looked up at the stars not with fear, but wonder. That time seemed so far away now. War had changed everything, and it was only just beginning. Where once the stars had been places of mystery and wonder, they had become fields of fire and ruin. Across dozens of systems, human ships fought each other and anyone else who got in their way. What had started as a civil war between Earth's Central Alliance and the outer colonies had grown into something far bigger. The Voric hegemony, a proud and ancient race known for their heavy armor and brutal tactics, lost 2 cruisers near Epsilon Eridani. They had tried to mediate peace talks but were caught in the crossfire. Whether it was an accident or not didn't matter. What mattered was that the Voric saw it as an act of war. Within weeks, they deployed battle groups to protect their own borders. Patrols became more aggressive. Trade routes were blocked. Any human ship that came too close was warned or fired upon. The Zilari Concord, a peaceful species that had long avoided conflict, issued formal statements calling for calm. When those failed, they sent envoys to speak directly with both sides. The alliance listened, but only briefly. The outer colonies refused to meet at all. After one of their diplomatic vessels was destroyed near Titan, the Zilari declared sanctions against human space. They stopped all trade, closed their gates to human travelers, and pulled their observers from the Galactic Council. No one had seen this kind of reaction before. Humanity had always been a small player among the older, more established civilizations. Now they were shaking the galaxy itself. On Earth, President Elizabeth Grant stood in a darkened war room filled with maps and blinking lights. Military leaders surrounded her, voices rising and falling in argument. "We can't stop now," General Carter said. "If we pull back, the colonies will take everything. And if we keep going," Admiral Hensley replied, "we'll be fighting every alien species in the core systems." Grant rubbed her temples. She hadn't slept in days. Reports came in faster than she could read them. Entire fleets were being rebuilt in record time. Orbital factories churned out weapons at a terrifying pace. Even medical labs had shifted focus from healing to enhancing soldiers. Humans were adapting. Fast. In orbit around Mars, new warships took shape. Sleek, deadly, built for speed and firepower. Older models were upgraded with experimental engines and smarter targeting systems. Drones once used for mining and construction were now flying into battle alongside manned fighters. It wasn't just machines that changed. People did too. Jason Wilson, once a mechanic from Alpha Centauri IV, now flew a fighter in the Alliance fleet. His hands, once used to fixing engines, now guided missiles into enemy hulls. He didn't like it, but he followed orders. He remembered the first time he saw another human ship explode in front of him. Not an enemy drone or a distant target on radar, but a real ship, full of real people. He'd vomited after the mission. Now he barely flinched. Lisa Martinez, stationed on the Uranus mining platform, turned command center. spent her days listening to the voices of dying pilots and broken transmissions. She had once dreamed of exploring deep space, of making contact with unknown worlds. Now her job was to break codes and track enemy movements. One night, she sat alone in her quarters, staring at a message she couldn't send. It was addressed to her brother, who had joined the outer colony forces. She didn't know if he was still alive. She wanted to believe the war would end soon. That peace would return, but looking at the reports, seeing how fast humans built and rebuilt, she doubted it. This wasn't just a war anymore. It was something else, something unstoppable. Across the colonies, young men and women volunteered in droves. Some believed in freedom. Others feared what Earth might do if they won. Schools taught history lessons rewritten overnight. Heroes were made and forgotten within weeks. On the planet Nova Terra, a former teacher named Alex Parker joined the resistance. He wasn't a soldier, but he knew how to inspire people. His speeches were broadcast across the colonies, urging others to fight, to resist, to stand up. His voice became a symbol of hope. But not everyone believed in symbols. On board the Alliance, Carrier Atlantis, Commander Daniel Ross studied enemy movements. He had served for over 20 years and had seen many wars come and go. None of them felt like this. They learned too fast, he muttered, watching footage of a recent battle. Too damn fast? His second-in-command, Lieutenant Maria Cruz, nodded. They're not just fighting us, they're learning from every mistake. Ross sighed. So are we. But it wasn't enough. The colonies adapted faster. They found weaknesses in alliance formations, exploited supply lines, ambushed convoys in ways no one expected. The war was no longer about territory or politics. It was about survival, and humanity was surviving by becoming something new. Farther, out beyond Pluto, the strange signals continued. Scientists at the Deep Space Listening Post tried to decode them. They weren't from the colonies. They weren't from any known human system. They were alien, and whoever sent them was getting closer. Back on Earth, President Grant met with a group of scientists working on a top-secret project. The lab was buried, beneath the Alps, hidden from public view. How much longer? She asked. 6 months, maybe less, one scientist replied. If we get the resources. Grant looked at the machine in front of her. It was unlike anything ever built, designed not just to destroy enemies but to reshape entire battlefields. Make it sooner, she said. As she left, she glanced at the sky through a small window. The sun was setting. Somewhere out there, battles raged, ships burned, people died, and yet humanity kept building, kept fighting, kept moving forward. Not because they wanted to, but because they could, because they had learned that war was not just destruction. It was evolution, and the galaxy was starting to notice. On the Zilari homeworld, council members debated whether to cut all ties with humanity. Some argued for isolation. Others feared what would happen if humans were left unchecked. On Voric warships, warriors sharpened their blades and prepared for more fights. They respected strength, and humans had plenty of it. In secret meetings, diplomats whispered of a future where humanity would not be stopped, where they would no longer need permission to expand, to explore, to rule. Some called it arrogance, others called it destiny. But no one could deny one thing. Humanity had gone all in on war, and the galaxy would never be the same. Space was full of fire. Ships burned in the dark between planets. Colonies fell silent. Whole moons were turned to glass by orbital strikes. What had started as a war between humans had become something much bigger. Now, it was not just about who ruled human space. It was about how far humanity could go before someone stopped them. Among the stars, 3 names began to rise. Liam Carter was not a soldier. He had never fired a gun in battle, never flown a fighter into combat. But his mind was sharper than any weapon. Once an engineer on a mining rig near Uranus, he now worked deep inside the Alliance war machine. He had built something new, something that changed how battles were fought. His system, called Pulse-E, linked thousands of drones together. They moved like a single force, faster than any pilot could react. They attacked, defended, repaired ships, and even reprogrammed enemy machines mid-fight. In one battle near Alpha Centauri, a small Alliance fleet faced destruction. Surrounded by colony warships outgunned and low on fuel, they should have lost. But then Liam's drones arrived. They came from behind asteroids, from abandoned stations, from nowhere. They swarmed the enemy like insects made of steel and fire. Within minutes, half the colony fleet was destroyed. The rest ran. The Alliance won. And they owed it all to a man who had once fixed broken engines in zero gravity. On Nova Terra, Maya, Reyes walked through the ruins of a city that used to be beautiful. Tall towers had fallen. Streets once filled with life were now empty. Smoke still rose from old fires that hadn't fully died. She wasn't a soldier either. She was a journalist, but in this war the truth was more dangerous than bullets. Her reports came from the front lines. She rode with fighters, slept in bunkers, watched friends die beside her. She recorded everything, every loss, every victory, every horror. Her words traveled fast, smuggled through enemy lines, broadcast on hidden channels. She showed the galaxy what war really looked like. Not just numbers and maps, but people crying, children hiding, mothers burying sons. When she published her report on the attack at Titan, the real truth, not the propaganda from either side, it shook the galaxy. Aliens who had stayed neutral began to question their silence. Diplomats whispered her name in secret meetings. Soldiers read her words before going into battle. May the gods help us all. One Zilari observer wrote after reading her latest piece. These humans do not stop. And then there was Alex Parker. Once a teacher, now a symbol. He didn't carry a rifle, but his voice was louder than any weapon. He stood in front of crowds, spoke into cameras, told the outer colonies they were not alone. We are not asking for peace, he said once, standing on a ruined bridge. We are demanding justice. His speeches spread across the colonies like wildfire. Young men and women joined the fight because of him. Some even named their ships after him. Others carved his words into their armor. He wasn't a general. He wasn't a politician. He was just a man who believed in something greater than fear. But belief was dangerous in war. One night, a message reached him, short and simple. They know where you are? Alex read it twice, then handed the device back to the courier. He looked around the underground shelter where he had been speaking just hours ago. People still slept in corners, wrapped in blankets. Children dreamed despite the noise of distant bombs. He knew he couldn't stay. If they found him here, they would destroy this place. So he left. He disappeared into the night, leaving only his voice behind. Back on Earth, President Elizabeth Grant sat in her office, staring at a screen filled with reports. Liam's drones had changed the balance of power. Maya's words had shaken the world, and Alex's speeches had inspired millions. None of them were meant for this war. None of them asked for it. But here they were, shaping history anyway. Miles away, in orbit. Above Mars, Jason Wilson sat in the cockpit of his fighter. He had seen too many battles, too many friends die. He used to think war would end soon. Now he wasn't sure it ever would. His hands trembled slightly as he checked his flight controls. Beside him, a younger pilot sat nervously. You okay? Jason asked. Not really, the boy replied. Jason gave a tired smile. Me neither, but we fly anyway. Outside, the stars were bright, but below on the surface, smoke rose from another city under attack. Farther out, Lisa Martinez listened to radio signals from the front. She heard Maya's latest report play over the airwaves. She closed her eyes and let the words sink in. For the first time in weeks, she felt something close to hope. Even in the middle of war, people still tried to make a difference, some with machines, some with words, some with nothing but courage. And somewhere in the dark beyond Pluto, the strange signals continued, closer now, louder. Whatever was coming, it was almost here, back on Nova Terra. Alex Parker walked alone through the forest. He wore a simple coat, carried only what he needed. Behind him, the war raged on. Ahead, the unknown waited. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to keep moving, because if he stopped, the war might forget why it was being fought. And that more than anything scared him. In the sky above, a ship passed silently. It belonged to the Alliance. Scanning. Searching. They were looking for him. They would find him eventually, but not tonight. Tonight he was still free. And so was hope. Far away, in a hidden lab beneath the Alps, scientists worked late into the night. President Grant had ordered them to finish their project. Sooner. They were close now. The machine was ready. What it could do, if used, would change everything. Grant stared at the screen showing the battlefield. Reports came in faster than she could read. Losses on both sides. Victories and defeats, more colonies falling. She exhaled slowly. "Make sure it works," she whispered. Then she turned away from the screen and walked into the dark. Space was full of fire, but down on the ground, among the ashes, something else was growing. Ideas. Hope. Change. And the galaxy was starting to notice. Not just because of weapons or ships, but because of people. People who refused to give up, even when the world was burning around them. The war ended not with a bang, but with silence. After years of fire and blood, the fighting just stopped. Ships that once chased each other across the stars now floated without orders. Soldiers who had lived through endless battles found themselves unsure what to do next. The weapons were still loaded. The hatred was still fresh. But there was no one left to fight. By 2153, both sides were broken. The Alliance had lost half its fleet. Earth's surface bore scars from orbital strikes. Food supplies were low. Cities stood empty. The outer colonies were no better off. Their worlds had been burned, their people scattered. What had started as a fight for freedom had become a long nightmare with no clear winner. There were no parades, no heroes returning home, only survivors trying to find meaning in the ruins. On Nova Terra, Alex Parker walked through the remains of a town he used to know. The buildings were gone. Trees were blackened. Children played in the dirt where homes once stood. They didn't know the war was over. They had never known anything else. He sat on a broken wall and looked at the sky. It was quiet now. No ships flying overhead, no explosions lighting up the night, but the silence felt heavier than the noise of war. Back on Earth, President Elizabeth Grant stood alone in her office. She had won. Sort of. The Alliance still held power. But at what cost? She looked at reports showing dead zones on Mars, abandoned stations around Uranus, and entire systems gone dark. Billions had died. Trillions had been spent. And for what? Control? Freedom? Pride? She didn't have answers anymore. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the latest message from the Auxiliary Concord. They wanted to talk. So did the Voric hegemony. Even the neutral races wanted to meet, not to stop the war, but to understand what had just happened. Humanity had gone all in on war, and the galaxy had watched in horror. In orbit above Mars, Jason Wilson stepped out of his fighter for the last time. He had flown more missions than he could count. He had seen friends die, enemies burn, and whole planets fall. Now there was nothing left to shoot at. He looked at the ground crew unloading fuel from the ship. They moved slowly, like ghosts. Some hadn't slept in days. Others hadn't smiled in months. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like someone who had barely survived. Nearby, Lisa Martinez sat in a command center filled with old messages. She read Maya Reyes's last report, sent just before the ceasefire. "We have won nothing," it said, "except the right to remember." Lisa closed her eyes. She had spent years listening to the voices of dying pilots, watching names disappear from the lists. Now, she wasn't sure what to do with the silence. Farther out in deep space, something else was happening. As the war ended, the strange signals near Pluto grew louder. The listening post scientists tried to send warnings, but no one listened. Everyone was too busy burying their dead. Then one day, contact was lost. No more transmissions, no more voices, just static. But by then, no one cared. The war was over. The galaxy was tired. And humanity had proven something terrible. They could change the rules. They could win by force, and they could survive anything, even themselves. Weeks passed. Slowly, the pieces of the old world began to come back together. Damaged cities started rebuilding. Trade routes reopened. Old alliances formed again, but differently this time. The Zilari Concord allowed limited travel once more. The Vorik opened their borders to human diplomats. Other species followed. Not because they trusted humans, but because they feared what would happen if they didn't. Humanity had forced the galaxy to notice them, not through peace, not through science, but through sheer willpower and unrelenting force. Liam Carter, the man who had built Pulse, returned to Uranus. He walked through the mining rigs where he once worked, now half abandoned. He looked at the machines he had helped build, machines that had changed how wars were fought. He didn't feel proud. He felt scared. Because if humans could build something like Pulse during war, what would they build in peace? May the gods help us all. On Earth, the first post-war council meeting took place. Leaders from both sides sat at the same table. They didn't shake hands. They barely spoke. But they were there. President Grant watched from the back of the room. She knew this was just the start. The real work, the rebuilding, the healing, the remembering, was just beginning. Outside, protesters gathered. Some demanded justice. Others wanted revenge. Most just wanted to forget. But forgetting was impossible, because every city had a graveyard, every family had a loss, and every soldier carried a memory they would never speak of. In the skies above, new ships were already being built. Not warships. Not yet. But the plans were ready, and somewhere in the cold dark beyond Pluto, something waited. Something that had watched the war from afar. Something that had learned what humans could do when pushed to the edge. And now, it was getting closer. Back, on Nova Terra, Alex Parker stood on a hill overlooking what remained of his home. The wind blew softly, the sun set behind broken towers. He didn't know what came next. He only knew that the war was over, and the future had just begun. Space was quiet again. For now. Miles away, in a hidden lab beneath the Alps, the machine still sat waiting. It had never been used, but it had been built, and someone someday would press the button. Down on Earth, Jason Wilson walked through a city that was slowly coming back to life. Lights flickered in windows. Children laughed in the streets. Music played from an old speaker in a cafe. He looked at the sky. He remembered the sound of missiles, the smell of burning metal, the faces of men and women who never made it home. He exhaled. Then he kept walking, because that's what survivors do. They keep going. Even when the world has ended, especially when it has, and far away in the silence between stars, something watched, waiting, learning, preparing. Because humanity had shown the galaxy what they could do when they went all in, and now the rest of the universe had to decide. Would they follow or would they fall? The war was long gone, but its echoes still lived on. In every city that had burned, in every family that had lost someone, in every soldier who could not forget the sound of battle, its mark remained. History books called it the Great Reckoning. Some said it was humanity's darkest hour. Others believed it was the moment they proved they belonged among the stars. Either way, nothing was the same after that day. The galaxy had once seen humans as young, unpredictable, and too emotional. Now, they saw them as something else. Dangerous, fast learning, unstoppable when they put their minds to something, and most of all, unafraid to fight. After the war ended, humanity did not retreat. They did not disappear into the background like so many species expected. Instead, they stepped forward. Not with weapons this time, but with ideas. They rebuilt faster than anyone thought possible. New cities rose where old ones had fallen. Space stations were repaired. Trade routes reopened. Colonies sent messages again. But more than that, they made deals. Former enemies became trading partners. Old rivals turned into uneasy allies. Even the Zalari Concord, who had once cut all ties with human space, opened diplomatic channels again. Not out of trust, but because they knew one thing. Humans didn't ask permission anymore. They made their own rules. On Earth, statues were built. Not just of soldiers or leaders, but of engineers, doctors, and journalists. Liam Carter's name was carved into the side of a research station orbiting Uranus. Maya Rea's voice was played in schools across the colonies. Alex Parker's speeches were printed in books and read by generations who never knew war firsthand. They weren't heroes in the old sense. They hadn't won battles with swords or guns. They had changed minds, and that was sometimes more powerful than any weapon. Farther, out in space, Jason Wilson walked through a quiet spaceport on Titan. He wasn't a pilot anymore. He worked at a repair shop now, fixing old ships that still carried the scars of war. He didn't talk much about what he had done during the fighting. People didn't ask. They knew enough. One day, a young boy came in asking about an old fighter model from the Alliance fleet. "Did you fly one of these?" the boy asked. Jason looked at the ship. It was covered in dust. Its wings were cracked. Its paint was faded. "Once," he said quietly. The boy's eyes lit up. What was it like? Jason thought for a moment. Then he smiled, just a little. "Loud," he said. "And cold, and sometimes very lonely." The boy frowned. "Was it worth it?" Jason didn't answer right away. He looked out the window at the dark sky. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe not." Then he turned back to his work, because that's what survivors do. They keep moving, even if they don't know why. Down on Nova Terra, Lisa Martinez sat in a small office filled with old reports. She worked for the new Galactic Council now, helping to translate alien messages and track peace treaties. It was strange how quickly things had changed. Once she had spent her days listening to the voices of dying pilots. Now she listened to diplomats arguing over trade rights. Some things never changed. She looked at a message from the Zalari. They wanted to meet, to discuss further cooperation between species. She signed the reply. Then she leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt something close to peace. Across the stars, other species watched closely. The Vorik, hegemony, once wary of human strength, now trained alongside human warriors. They respected power, and humans had plenty of it. The Zalari studied human culture, trying to understand what drove them. Some feared them, others admired them, and in secret places far from human worlds, older races whispered about the future, about what would happen next. Because humanity had proven something. They could change the galaxy. They had done it once before. And they might do it again. Back on Earth, a new generation grew up without knowing war. They played games in zero gravity. They learned about alien languages in school. They dreamed of exploring deep space. Not conquering it, but some still remembered. Some still told stories. Stories of fire in the sky, of ships falling like stars, of brothers and sisters who fought and died for something they believed in, and of a time when humanity went all in on war and changed everything. In a hidden lab beneath the Alps, the machine still waited. No one had used it, but it was still there. And someday someone might press the button. Because that was the truth about humans. They didn't just survive. They built. They learned. They changed. And when they set their minds to something, nothing could stop them. Space was quiet now, but it wouldn't stay that way forever. Somewhere beyond Pluto, the silence stretched on, waiting, watching, preparing. Because the galaxy had learned a lesson it would never forget. Never underestimate a species that can turn destruction into progress, that can take pain and make something stronger from it, that can go all in on war and win. Not just the war, but the future, because humanity had shown what they could do when given a chance, when backed into a corner, when they decided the rules no longer applied. And now, the stars belonged to them. As the sun set over a rebuilt city on Mars, a child pointed at the sky. "Look," she said. Above them, a new ship rose. Not a warship. Not yet. But the plans were ready, and somewhere, in the hearts of those who had lived through the storm, hope was growing again, and maybe, just maybe, that was the real victory.